Welcome back, Mr. Goodberry. The First Star Logistics studio is fully equipped and ready to record.
Welcome back to Bengals on the Brain, presented by First Star Logistics. I'm your host, Joe Goodberry. This is episode 79. The Bengals have concluded their draft. They're signing some undrafted free agents right now. We will talk about that at a later date. Usually don't get a official list until the Bengals like to announce it. So we'll focus on their 10 draft picks. Yes, they made all 10 selections. Some people wondered and questioned if they would or if they would trade up in this draft. They did not. They stood pat and made all 10 selections. We'll start with the top, even though we've talked about Amarius Mims in the last video. Let's talk a little bit more and start grading their draft as a whole and how it came to, well, I'm not going to give you the grade until the very end. I almost did. And then thought, no, probably not a good idea. Let's start. Amarius Mims, offensive tackle out of Georgia at pick 18. This is a guy we already did a film breakdown on, and you could probably find that if you scroll down the First Star Media page. If you're not a subscriber, if this is your first time watching, we did about 40 prospects or so, did film reviews. So we have the first two guys, at least, already done, and Kris Jenkins and Amarius Mims. But Mims, finally, they get their athletic, huge upside offensive tackle. And we've been critical of their offensive line drafting, but they haven't had a chance to draft a guy with this much upside. I should say they haven't done it because they've had chances. There was the Jackson Carman year. We listed all the elite athletes they could have drafted, and they chose to take Carman, but now they do. Now they get a guy with the size and the athleticism and the youth that you want at that position as well to let this guy blossom into whatever it may be. Amarius Mims has some of the highest upside of any prospect in this class. You don't typically get these guys at pick 18. And when the first 14 picks were all offensive line, or not offensive line, just offensive players, that means like to even still feel that way about an offensive prospect at 18, he must have been really, really good. Like if it was a heavy defensive class and you got Mims at 18, I'd say, yeah, that makes sense. The defenders were just so much better in this class. But no, you've got the 15th offensive player, and yet he's still more than likely a top 10 pick had he have played an entire season at Georgia the following year and stayed healthy and showed some improvement. Those are the caveats, right? If he gets hurt again, that wouldn't have helped him. If he didn't show any improvement, that wouldn't have helped him. So it's always on the upside of it, of when you take a guy with a wide range of outcomes, and he does. It's not just that he's a safe player with high upside, because those guys usually go much earlier. He does have a low floor and a high ceiling. And he does because we just haven't seen enough of him at Georgia to be sure. There's maybe 6 games total where he plays over 50 snaps. There's 8 games that he started at his Georgia career. You're saying what we saw in those is enough to make this bet. Or also, where we wouldn't have had the chance to draft him had he have gone back and stayed healthy and played well for Georgia for an entire season, he'd be a top 10 pick. And with the Bengals and Joe Burrow, we don't expect them to pick in the top 20 on most years. Even 18 this year was kind of a shock because Burrow went down and got hurt. And then, obviously Jake Browning kept the ship afloat just enough for them to end up with a winning record. But getting Mims at that spot, he's projected to go around that spot. I think he was 20th on the consensus overall board. You get him at 18. Good value there, right? And nothing added, nothing lost. Like a Quinion Mitchell in the first round comes out as one of the best picks of all the picks because he was projected to be a top 15 pick, and the Eagles get him at 24. That's how you get a higher score. I'm a little bit of a harsh grader. I don't give you an A because you did what you were supposed to do. To me, that's a B. You got the player you should have gotten. You didn't get any extra perceived value from pre-draft rankings and scores. You also took some risks. You took a bet that he would be better also, and that he would develop into the player you think. So it's hard to give them anything too high or too low. To me, this is a straight B pick, and I'm happy with it. And some may say B plus because of the need, because of how poorly they've drafted on the offensive line. to actually get a guy that has all the markings. Because when you draft a Billy Price and a Jonah Williams, they never had the markings of a Pro Bowl player. That upside was never there. They took a floor and then said maybe we can get a little bit more upside on those guys. And then they didn't, and we found out the floor was even lower for Billy Price. With Mims, you may have that low floor, but you have a ceiling that they have not drafted in the first round. So if you want to say a B plus and use that argument against me, I wouldn't be against that at all. Moving on into round 2. The Bengals take Kris Jenkins, the defensive tackle out of Michigan, and we have done a film review on him as well. And I just watched that recently because I wanted to get a feel for what I saw again when I watched Kris Jenkins, because it was early in the process. I think we were still, it had to be January when we watched him originally, because there was talks that maybe he can go in the first round. I didn't see it based on film because of 2 reasons, really. Number one, you never get to see him really be a pass rusher in that Michigan defense. Michigan had waves of defensive linemen, almost like they had 2 really good prospects, and then everybody else was just part of a rotation. And for Kris Jenkins, they felt he was a run defender first and foremost, which he was, and he was very good at it. Some may say, some Ohio State people I've seen in my mentions on Twitter will say, well, he knew what plays were coming, so of course he looked good. And I don't know how to I don't know how to evaluate that part of it. I'm not going to. I'm just going to evaluate what I saw on the field. And I do think of Mezzie Smith from last year from Michigan. Different player because he was more of a nose. Cowboys took him in the first round, and he had an absolutely dreadful rookie year. So maybe there's some transition there that we'll have to see with Kris Jenkins. But I do see him as a good run defender with high pedigree because his father was a Pro Bowl defensive tackle, very good player. Because you don't see him as a pass rusher ever. Like, I remember when, put the link to the episode here, or maybe we can have a pop-up bubble here for my producer here. However that works. I don't know. I don't do that part. I just do the analysis. But if you go back and watch the Kris Jenkins episode we did, we'll have like 6 or so nice run defending highlights per game, and we'll have 1 pass rushing win per game. And that's just not enough for me to spend a top 50 pick on a guy, because if he is exactly what he was in college and he's a solid run defender, maybe average at best pass rusher, well, then I think, even if he's a BJ Hill type level player and a replacement for BJ Hill in a year, you're still going to want that defensive tackle number 1. You're still going to want that pass rusher. It doesn't eliminate, you spend a premium pick, a top 2 round pick on it, and yet you'll still probably want to spend a first round pick on a defensive tackle in the next coming years. So, I'm not going to be overly grade them as an A for the Kris Jenkins pick. I think, again, Kris Jenkins is a B level pick. He was 51st on the consensus level, or in the consensus rankings. The Bengals took him at 49. Perfect. That's the perceived value. You took him at that spot. Now, I will say on the positive end, he is a complete upgrade over Zach Carter. Zach Carter was a liability as a run defender. Every time there was a big run, I kept looking at the defensive line last year on film or while we were watching live, and I'd say, who was Zach Carter was out there? Makes sense. Josh Tupou was out there, who we'll get to when we get to the McKinley Jackson pick. But replacing Carter with Kris Jenkins is a complete upgrade for me. So one of the big issues they had with run defense last year was their second wave defensive line. While I'm praising Michigan for this, the Bengals couldn't rotate their defensive tackles last year. You had to have BJ Hill and DJ Reader out there if you wanted success. When they had to put Carter in, or had to put Josh Tupou or J2 Faley in there, whoever else they were scraping the bottom of the barrel with, the results were evident. You notice the difference right away. They weren't NFL level players. If you say Kris Jenkins has more upside as a pass rusher, I would say that's a hopeful analysis. That's a hopeful reasoning for the pick. And the Bengals have had issues on defense getting players to be maximized that they've drafted, whether that's Dax Hill using him correctly, whether that's Joseph Osai using him correctly. How many times we've seen Joseph Osai trying to rush from the defensive tackle spot? This is a guy that was a linebacker edge type defender, and he's rushing from D tackle spot. Zach Carter was a pass rushing defensive end D tackle hybrid type, and all he's been able to do is be a run defender taking on double teams. Like, that's not That's not ideal. So are they going to use Kris Jenkins correctly? Or are they going to say, hey, you're a pass rusher? Because, I mean, that's a lot of unknowns and risks. Very similar to the way I've talked about Amarius Mims. You don't see it on tape. You're hopeful, but because we haven't seen it, I can't be overly excited with the idea that he's anything more than a run defending defensive tackle 3 that could develop into a low end starter defensive tackle type 2. So, 2B, 2 as in the number, B graded picks to start this draft. Next up, the Bengals had 2 third-round selections, and as pick number 80 was coming up, I knew the Bengals liked Jermaine Burton and Jalen McMillan, the 2 wide receivers. They obviously took Burton, but McMillan, the wide receiver out of Washington, both guys had slot outside versatility. They could do both. They could provide the opportunity to get Jamar Chase into the slot, which is one thing I thought they should prioritize. So I'm glad they did that. They also need to get more explosive at this position. Get more explosive players on offense as a whole, anyway. Should have been one of their goals this year. And boy, did they with Jermaine Burton. Yes, he's got some character issues. He's been to a bunch of schools, transferred a bunch, apparently punched a fan when they ran out on the field. Like, there's things. He's talked about his passion and emotion and keeping himself in check and funneling it into the right areas on the field. All things that could potentially be corrected as he matures and grows in the NFL. Or it could go the other way as he gets money and more freedom. You never know with these types. But that's why he was still there at 80, because on tape and his highlights, I mean, just enjoy his highlights. Put him on. We'll do a film review of all these players. So we didn't do one of Jermaine Burton, thinking he was probably off the board for them because they haven't drafted these type of guys. But you see how excited Zach Taylor was after that pick. Clearly, they didn't care. At this point, third round, you take a Chris Henry guy because the talent is undeniable, right? And not saying he's Chris Henry or not, but he could have that type of impact while you already have 2 really good starters. Henry just had to be their explosive player that complemented their 2 other players. I remember reading articles about them struggling with cover 2 cloud shells even in 2006, 2007, and how Chris Henry was the answer to really get things downfield and open it up to give them another option in the passing game. And Jermaine Burton could be that guy as well. And we're talking about a guy that has great hands, very explosive, off the line in his cuts. And we'll save the analysis, a player analysis, when we watch the film, which will be one of the next episodes. But the downfield ability to track the ball, play the ball in the air, concentration through contact while the ball's in the air, the body positioning and keeping your feet in bounds and awareness of the sideline, all high level stuff. There isn't a wide receiver evaluator that didn't like Jermaine Burton on film. The data didn't love him because it took him so long to break out, right? He's going to be 23 as a rookie. He finally had a good year last year. It puts him in a bucket of players that historically don't become number 1 or number 2 type receivers. But for the Bengals, do we really care if he's a number 1 or 2? We have Jamar Chase. So Burton could be like your high splash play wide receiver 3. And I think in that offense, if you lose T. Higgins, maybe he can outplay that and be a number 2. Or in the future, you end up with a really good tight end or another good wide receiver 3, and you piecemeal it together for that second, third option, with Burton being the high variance, big play threat, which I could easily see. I compared him to Chris Conley on Twitter, and people didn't remember Chris Conley out of Georgia, who was a very explosive, athletic athlete that had a lot of the same skills, but didn't produce until that final year at Georgia. And then it being a third round pick, I think it was 76 overall to the Kansas City Chiefs. And he had a 8-year career, inconsistent 8-year career, but a bunch of years with 550 yards and 5 touchdowns. And that was a medium expectation for Jermaine Burton. Where if he's getting 550 yards and 3 TDs or 5 TDs as the number 3 option, that's really good, especially when you consider Conley and Burton can average like 17, 18, 19, 20 yards per catch as downfield weapons. That's a lot of fun and valuable to your offense. Do I see him as an upside? Maybe a Terry McLaurin. If he hits everything, I think he's very similar to McLaurin. And McLaurin, who was behind a bunch of talented receivers at Ohio State, played a lot of special teams, went to the Senior Bowl and showed he could do everything. So his data bucket wasn't very good, similar to Jermaine Burton. And McLaurin became he's probably a very good number two. I wouldn't say he's a number one, but maybe that's the upside for Jermaine Burton. There's also on the downside guys like Adarius Stewart, that was a former third round pick out of Alabama, who had a very similar production profile, got to the league and just couldn't do anything. I think the film is different though for Burton. He is that much better on film. That makes me think he's at least Chris Conley, with the upside of maybe a Terry McLaurin, maybe a Tyler Lockett type of receiver as a wide receiver too, which we would all accept that and take that. For me, there is risk again here. So 3 straight guys with a little bit of risk. If you're projecting Kris Jenkins to be more than he was, Amarius Mims, clear risk, got right, but the upside is worth it. And then Jermaine Burton is the risk in terms of character, but he's not landing in a great situation with Joe Burrow, Jamar Chase, T. Higgins, Troy Walters, right? That's, if I were to choose before a pre-draft what kind of team I'd like Burton to fall into, it would be a team with a strong quarterback, with a wide receiver one already there, with a strong setting and culture already established. And that, so he's getting all of that. And I think that'll be his best chance to hit the upside markers for him. Again, I'm giving that pick a B. Now, the Bengals did consider taking Adonai Mitchell, the wide receiver out of Texas, instead of Kris Jenkins. He was on the short list when they got there. They wanted a defensive tackle. They liked Kris Jenkins. But would we have rathered an AD Mitchell at that spot and then come back and get a defensive tackle? Well, the next defensive tackle on their list would have been McKinley Jackson, who they had on the short list at 80. If it wasn't McMillan or Burton, they ended up taking him. Clearly, no decision even to make at 97. And they take McKinley Jackson, the Texas A&M nose tackle. That's the question. So McKinley Jackson, the 22-year-old out of Texas A&M, two-time captain, probably considered a nose tackle. And I think the Bengals wanted a nose tackle after the Tavondre Sweat pick happened very early in round 2. They may have elevated the need. I think they would have liked Sweat at either 80 or 97 if it would have went the way we thought pre-draft. And then McKinley Jackson being the next best guy, in their opinion, and probably if you go back to January, he was the next best guy all the way until the class got weird, I think, with some of these guys not testing well, not performing well, not interviewing well, all the things that happened through the draft process. So McKinley Jackson was still there, projected to be anywhere from a 4th to 7th round pick. And that's largely because that's where nose tackles should be drafted based on everything that goes into a draft process. You can see the tape and like the tape. And I had a 75 grade on McKinley Jackson, which is a fine beginning a 3rd round selection, and actually higher than Kris Jenkins, because I think McKinley Jackson actually shows a little bit more as a pass rusher. But because the athletic testing is not going to be great, because the production profile is not going to be great, and then the PFF grades for McKinley Jackson are middling, he comes out as in that grouping that you should probably just pull a lottery ticket on day 3, meaning 5th, 6th round if you really want to attack the nose tackle position. So I think this was a reach at 97. Now, I do think McKinley Jackson can be a good player. I think he's a bit of an anomaly. When we call him a nose tackle, I'm not sure he's that, to be honest with you. There are different types of nose tackle. Typically, a nose tackle is your big body, longer guy that can stack 2 guys up, absorb the contact of the guards trying to double team them. 2 gap, protect both sides, throw a guy down, make a play, or just absorb the 2 blockers and allow your linebacker to come up and make a play in the gap next to you. The Bengals, that's how they used DJ Reader, and he was fantastic at it. When I watched McKinley Jackson do that, he was not good. And he's one of the guys that are 6'1" at nose tackle, the Andrew Billings type, the Brandon Thompson type of the Pat Sims. The Pat Sims, Andrew Billings type of nose tackle, where, yes, they have the bulk and the strength to do it, but often they get swallowed up because they're not the tallest guys in their vision. So, like, as you're 2-gapping, you need to be able to see vision of the running back and know where the ball is going. And then when you can't do that, you tend to get swallowed up a bit and spit out on the other end. So sometimes that's why you want the height at the nose tackle spot. What I thought McKinley Jackson did well instead was more of a 1-gap nose tackle. So, the signing of Rankins makes me think they're changing their defense a little bit as well, because now Rankins and BJ Hill are your top 2 defensive tackles. And now the nose tackle you do have on the roster and the addition of Kris Jenkins, I could see them going to more of a 1-gap penetrating style defense, which great. That's fine. But they don't really have a one-gap penetrator on the roster. So it'll be interesting. Sheldon Rankins, I guess, is the best one of that group. So I shouldn't completely discredit that. But McKinley Jackson looked best to me almost as a like I said, a Billings or a Pat Sims type of defensive tackle, where if he gets under you and he's got natural leverage at 6'1", that's the advantage of being 6'1", and then having that density is once he got under guys, it was very hard for the offensive lineman to recover and get him out of the play. So he disrupted a lot of plays, but he wasn't the space eating, allow everyone else around him to make plays type of defensive tackle on tape. And I will show you the tape when we get there. It's a lot of fun because the splash plays are very, very nice. He's very inconsistent though. You'll go 2 quarters with him getting beat up pretty well, and then like 3 plays in a row of him just dominating and forcing that team to punt because he ruined their game plan for a drive. 2-type captain, understand why the Bengals took him. To me, it's a reach. To me, it's a C-, not just because I think they left nose tackle open going into the draft, so they increase the need for it, which is to me is a bad process. You don't want to force a pick. We've seen them do that before, so they kind of force this pick to happen to fill a need. And the value to me is poor because you typically want to draft nose tackles in the day 3 range, and they took them at 97. To me, that's a premium pick. This was your bonus pick. Also, once we get to the Erick, Tanner McLachlan double up at tight end, but I want to talk about it now. The Bengals weren't interested in trading up for Johnny Newton. So would you have rather have Kris Jenkins, McKinley Jackson, and Erick, Tanner McLachlan, whichever tight end, or would you rather have them just go up and get Johnny Newton? To me, I'd rather go have Johnny Newton, and we'll figure out nose tackle later. I'd rather have the penetrating, high upside Pro Bowl type player, and getting 2 of them to start the draft with a Newton and Amarius Mims would have been an A start for me, maybe even an A+ start for me. So my grading scale, knowing that they could have and maybe should have and had thought about it, hurts this draft a little bit, knowing that I think Newton's going to be pretty damn good. But not all is lost. I thought they had some very interesting day 3. So they open up day 3, 4th round, and jumped directly to tight end. We know Erick was really the only guy they met with, even though we did see later that they had a top 30 visit with Tanner McLachlan. Those were the 2 tight ends they met with. We pretty much got all 30 visits documented at this point, but All was the guy we knew before the draft. They had combine and pro day meetings with him. Erick could have been a 2nd or 3rd round pick had he stayed healthy. He only played a handful of games, and he led Iowa in receiving yards. So when we get to his film, it's going to be a lot of fun. And he left Michigan after a back injury surgery that apparently they didn't clear him for. There was some fighting. They didn't trust each other's doctors, yada, yada, yada. He transfers, plays a few games for Iowa, looks amazing, gets hurt, tears his ACL. Okay, so 2 injuries, right? That's why he's available in the 4th round. Is that worth the risk of the upside of the small couple games for Michigan where he has big games, and then the sample size we have for Iowa? He looks really good in there, and I think he shows the traits of a tight end 1 type. Good speed, good explosion in and out of his cuts, very good hands, pretty good route running for a guy that doesn't have all the experience. It's just the injuries, really. So now, from a profile perspective, we don't have the production data because he was never able to stay healthy and never able to produce at a high level for long enough. But like per catch, per route run looks really good. And then we don't have testing. And you want tight ends to be athletic if you're going to draft them with tight end 1 upside, which in the 4th round, I'm hoping they have that type of upside, or else why take them in the 4th round? So we don't have that. We don't have the athleticism testing. We don't have the production data for him. He's going to come out lower on our sheet as a major risk. Typically, I follow these principles for projecting draft success and players to succeed in the NFL. What were they in college is the first rule. That's what they'll be in the NFL. So if a guy had missed a lot of time, he's probably going to miss a lot of time. If a guy was often injured, he's probably going to be often injured. There are exceptions to this, and that's how you end up with the bonus players that all of a sudden they're healthy and they stay healthy and they're really good. That could happen. But a first rule for me is what they were in college. Whoever they tell you they are, trust that that's who they are. So if they're run defenders, trust they're run defenders. If they're pass rushers, trust that they will be pass rushers and pass rushers only if they don't show they can defend the run. For Erick, he's probably going to be a tantalizing splash player that deals with injuries. And I hope not. And if he doesn't, then great. It's a great 4th round pick. So again, we've got a lot of risk here throughout the first 4 rounds. And I'm going to give the Erick pick, again, a C minus, because I think if you're spending a 4th round pick on a tight end, that's a guy that should develop into a tight end 1. But maybe it's a C, because like on tape, and we'll get to it. I can't wait to show that tape on Erick in the next few episodes. It's really fun and it's convincing that he can be very good. And I think the Bengals were convinced by that, of course. The next pick, Josh Newton, cornerback out of TCU. They also met with pre-draft. They met with all of these players. Only one that they really didn't get confirmation for was Matt Lee at the end. But Josh Newton's interesting. He's a 6th-year player. And that's another thing. Erick will be a 24-year-old rookie. Plus, Albert Breer said he could redshirt this year or be on the PUP list or in his rookie season, which that's what hurt my grade even more. You may not get any production from him in his rookie season. Josh Newton also will be a 24-year-old rookie. We're going to get to the older guys now on day 3, as this class provided a lot of them. Newton is interesting because when I first watched him, I watched Texas and Colorado, and oh my God, he got torched. Absolutely torched. He didn't look very athletic. He didn't look like he had great ball skills. And now after they drafted him, a lot of people said, well, you got to watch these other games here. He really, those were his 2 worst games. He had good production. Plus, they said 2022 was really good for Josh Newton. So I will go back and do that. We will watch that together. We will make an episode out of it with him and maybe McKinley Jackson, pair some guys up, maybe Jermaine Burton and Josh Newton to pair them together. I didn't have a problem with, though. He was 140, he was 150th on our board. They took him at 149. That's perfectly fine value. Again, so we talked about the value with Burton being pretty lined up. He was 96 overall on the consensus. They got him at 80. McKinley Jackson was 163 consensus. They took him at 97. So again, that's part of why I said it was a reach. Erick is 163. They took him at 115. That's what I'm saying. Like, that felt early as well. The Josh Newton was probably the most cleanest value they took, other than Amarius Mims, in the first round. So Newton, the Bengals needed a corner 4. So I'm only going to be critical of this pick, because we're talking 5th round here, of this pick, because I think corner need was pressing. And getting a 4th corner, even though Dax Hill is moving to that room and probably will compete at that position, I thought they could spend an earlier pick on this. And I have to wonder if Newton is that guy I saw in the 2 games where he got absolutely torched, or is he a guy that probably maybe could kick inside? Is he a guy that is just a depth player for them? Our spreadsheet spits him out as a fine 5th round pick. I've got no issue with that pick. It's a B pick for me, as far as I know right now. And it might even increase if I go back and watch the tape and find he looks better in other aspects of the game. The double dip at tight end comes next. Tanner McLachlan out of Arizona, a guy that I did like on tape and thought he could be a tight end 2 type of player, be able to get him in the 6th round with the 194th pick. He was 165 on the consensus board. I'm sorry, 194. 25 years old already, 6th-year player from Canada through Arizona. I think he shows a lot of receiving upside. The thing I like about his profile the most is he makes guys miss. When you watch him on tape, if you type in Tanner McLachlan highlights on YouTube, you're going to see him jumping over people, spinning, clawing his way for any extra yard he can. He's a lot of fun to watch in that aspect, and he makes guys miss a lot. And he turns slants into 40-yard touchdowns over the middle by making safeties miss and just having enough wiggle and enough juice to be an impactful player in that offense. And I thought Arizona actually had a very fun offense with Michael Wiley at running back as well, who I don't think was drafted. Anyway, Tanner McLachlan is a fine pick for the spot for me. The double dip is weird, but he's probably got a better chance to make an impact as a rookie, because we expect him to be healthy, where Erick we're not sure about. So maybe they keep 4 tight ends and only 3 running backs. I think that is a possibility, with now tight end being one of the strongest rooms on their roster, which is interesting of where they've been at tight end for a while now. Tanner McLachlan, the only real knock is that 25-year-old profile, because he's athletic enough. He's even productive for being a 25-year-old. And he's a willing blocker. I don't think he's great in that area, but we'll see how that develops. Cedric Johnson was the next one. Defensive end on Ole Miss. They met with him at the combine. This is one of the younger players that went on day 3. Once day 3 happened around the league, it was 23-year-old, 24, 25 even year old rookies. Cedric Johnson's 21.6 years old as of right now. Only 4 years in college. Started very early. So 4 years and he's 21. Do the math. He was 17 as a freshman. I believe he had 3 sacks that year. That's very good production for his age. We use age adjusted production. And did I score Tanner McLachlan? I thought it was a C plus pick at that spot. Cedric Johnson, though, is one of the younger producers and then kind of plateaued. So, like, really early, oh, this looks good. And then kind of plateaued throughout the next 3 years at Ole Miss, who didn't have a very good defense when I watched them. I don't know how it ranked, so correct me if I'm wrong in the comments. But we'll get to Daijahn Anthony. Also, Bengals go back-to-back teammates, and they typically take teammates in drafts, which is a very weird fact for them. Cedric Johnson might have some upside left in his game. He's in the 64th percentile for market share adjusted production, which takes in age and your strength of schedule, which we know they play some really good teams down there at Ole Miss. Relative athletic score, a 9.28. So he's an athlete. He's young. PFF did not love him. A lot of his marks there show he did not win as a pass rusher, did not win often as a run defender, and it knocked his grade down pretty significantly. This is a C pick for me at this spot, as normal as it can be for 214. They did get value based on the consensus, a 154 consensus rank. Even on our board, he was 165. So they got value here, getting him about 40 to 50 spots later than what was expected. They follow that right up with the teammate Daijahn Anthony, the slot corner, safety, strong safety type. He's a lot of Mike Hilton in him, to be honest with you. Mike Hilton's from Ole Miss, was he? Yes. Anyways, Daijahn is a probably box safety, probably competes with Tyson Anderson as the final safety and special teamer. I could see him being a special teamer. He's the lowest scored player they drafted. I don't mind him though. He just seems very average across the board when I looked at him. He'll be a 24-year-old rookie at some point during his rookie season. He was ranked 251 on the consensus board. The Bengals took him at 224. We're talking 7th round here, right? What are we worried about? It's not much. You get a special teamer, then great. But the Bengals have burned some 7th round picks before on guys that maybe don't make the roster or we never see again. I do like Daijahn Anthony as a chance to make the team or at least make the practice squad his rookie year. We'll see how it goes after that. But my favorite pick in the entire draft was right after. And why I'm critical of a Daijahn Anthony, to me, that's like a D plus pick. It's 7th round, so I'm not going to give it an F or anything like that. But when you can get a Matt Lee at pick 237, 99th overall on our board, 197 on the consensus. So even you got 40 points on the consensus value board. We're way higher, but at least the consensus liked them as well. And you can draft players like that. I think that's how you get an A pick in the 7th round. And to me, Matt Lee is an A pick and their best pick of the draft when you consider value. And, it gets harder as you go later in the draft. So the difficulty gets a little bit harder when you nail a pick pre-draft. I give him higher marks for that. Matt Lee. Go back to the Braden Fisk video we did, the video review here. And I'm watching and I go, who is that center? He is kicking Fisk's butt. And then I watch Ruka Rororo. Same thing happens. Then I watch, there was a couple other. And I end up watching Matt Lee in total after that. And I'm like, this guy looks good. He's athletic. He's steady. He's got strong hands. He latches on to linebackers in the second level. I don't want to say he's Jason Kelsey because nobody is, but he looks like an Evan Brown level starting center who's been a starting center the last 3 years around the league. And if you get that in the 7th round, you'll take that. He has upside of a future starting player for the Bengals in the interior offensive line, and they haven't drafted a guy like this. Take Trey Hill. Matt Lee's a much better prospect, and they get him this much later. Deontay Smith, Hakeem Adeniji. They haven't drafted a guy with this level of athleticism, an 86.6 relative athletic score. So you're adding another elite athlete offensive lineman. That's 2 of them in this class. And that's really been my biggest criticism is if you want to hit an offensive lineman, you got to draft from the profile where good linemen come from. And they did that twice in this draft. I can't hate that. I can't knock them for doing that. Matt Lee gets an 80.7 cumulative PFF score for us, which is the highest of any player they drafted. So I'm surprised PFF didn't love him even more. His pass protection didn't allow a sack. His true pass sets were as clean as possible and puts him in like the 94th percentile amongst all interior offensive lineman prospects. Matt Lee's good. I can't wait to watch film and cut it up and show you guys because he's that good. He makes me excited for the entirety of the day 3. Because let's be honest, Newton and All and Tanner McLachlan, I'm like, cool. That could be fun if All stays healthy and plays well. I gave him a 72 on tape. I gave Tanner McLachlan a 71 on tape. I gave Matt Lee a 73. So like those are my picks I like. Newton, Cedric Johnson, Daijahn Anthony. We'll see if they make the roster, if they can make an impact. Cedric Johnson's probably battling for a roster spot as well. So, you get to a position where, hey, if Erick All's healthy, Tanner McLachlan may not make the roster. Cedric Johnson may not make it. Daijahn Anthony may not make it. I expect Matt Lee to be this team's backup center as a rookie, which is why I will grade that pick higher. So as a total, as a whole, I give this class a C+, and I waited to give my final grade because I graded every single draft class and every single team. You can find that on Twitter at Joe Goodberry, where I went over the analysis and how I view it and how I score things pre-draft. I try not to let the love for the Bengals and the players they pick influence me, and I continue to try to score them as they were pre-draft. The Bengals come and I'm a harsh grader. Like there was only a couple A's. There's a handful of B's. Most were in the B- to C+ range, and then a couple C- D's in there. The Bengals had a C+, put them in the average range. I thought they got average value throughout. I thought they got a bunch of players that could be starters down the line. Mims could be a starter. Kris Jenkins could be a starter. Jermaine Burton, McKinley Jackson, Erick All, or Tanner McLachlan, right? One of them could develop into a starter. You take a double dip there, increases your chances of finding one starter. I do like that. And then Matt Lee could end up being a starting center for them down the line. But the chances of him hitting all those when it's so risky, the risky picks they have made, probably cuts the grade down a little bit for me in a lot of ways. That's how I end up on a C+, which is fine. That is an average draft class. They did what they had to do. They answered a lot of questions, getting run defense on the inside, getting athletic pass rushers, and getting a weapon at the wide receiver spot with Jermaine Burton, and then maybe answering tight end of the future. Can't ask for much more than that, other than I would have liked a guard at some point. I would have liked an interior pass rusher at some point. I would have liked a higher spent pick at corner because that cornerback 4 may end up playing for you. They typically play for the Bengals and have been needed in both 2021 and 2022, and even last year, right? DJ Turner was supposed to be the 4th. He played a whole bunch for them. Cornerback 4 is important. Let's not discredit it. This has been Bengals on the Brain, presented by First Star Logistics, episode 79. That's our review of the draft. They did all right.
Dave Lapham here, and every day I am grateful for my experience to have played professional football. As a player, I realize self-motivation, leadership, and appreciating your teammates are key. At First Star Logistics, you can use those same attributes to create the life you want for you and your family. Build your future by working hard like I did. You'll see results both on and off the field. Call First Star Logistics today and be part of our winning team.
Opportunity knocking.